to the 2020 budget debate. Indeed, it is my maiden speech in this House as well. Firstly, as my colleagues have done, I wish to offer my warmest congratulations to Minister Bishop Edgell and the staff of the Ministry of Finance, and his staff as well, and indeed the staff of all the other ministers that have put together this budget in record time. It is important that we understand that this budget is required because it's been 640 days since this House has considered a budget for this nation. Now, the honorable member who spoke before me has said that we should do our homework. Now, it would help him when he said that there is a reduced budget and expenditure for Region 10. If he would take a look at Volume 1, page 570, 2018, $3.4 billion, 2019, $3.9 billion, 3.8 billion, 2020, $4.1 billion. Mr. Speaker, this budget is entitled Our Plan for Prosperity. It expressly states that it is, among other things, to strengthen democracy and the rule of law. It's unusual that 50-odd years in a country like ours, it is so crucial and important that we focus on the rule of law again. The rule of law, as we all know, has been around since the time of Aristotle, and that is essentially what guides civilized societies. In its modern incarnation, he's looking at me? All right. Mr. Dicey, the legal philosopher, Mr. Dicey, has the modern incarnation of the rule. And that is that the law must apply to everyone, including the lawmakers, the government, enforcement officials, and those who hold public office. In the last 5 years, Mr. Speaker, the rule of law has been eroded before our eyes. And in the last 5 months, in the 5 months that followed March 2nd, 2020, it was practically murdered on television daily. He didn't win any. Mr. Speaker, it has been 640 days since the government fell in a no-confidence motion. Now, the last time that this House considered a budget was the 14th of December, 2018. Indeed, 160 million, in excess of that, of this present budget, 160, more than 160 billion with a B, of this budget is to pay all of that expenditure that took place from the 1st of January to August 2nd without parliamentary oversight and without any oversight whatsoever. Mr. Speaker, We cannot wait for the period 21st December 2018 until June 18th, 2019 for a government and for the leadership of a country to figure out that 33 is the majority of 65. We cannot wait 179 days for leaders to appreciate, understand, and apply the most elementary principles of mathematics. The rule of law was undermined because the coalition, as government of the day, wanted not to respect the Constitution. The CCJ, the Caribbean Court of Justice, had to tell the coalition government that 33 was indeed a majority. It then took another 20 days. It took 20 days from the 18th of June 2020 to the 8th of July 2020 for the APNU AFC coalition to understand that Article 177 of the Constitution was obvious, that votes had to be counted. There was a rule. Valid votes, I'm not sure what else you were thinking of counting. But elections and governments are elected by votes. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member, Mr. Trotman, has said, if I heard him correctly, that no weapon formed against APNU AFC shall prosper. I humbly submit to you, he's wrong. It has been formed already. It's called the Caribbean Court of Justice. And that weapon has stood for the people of Guyana and against the destruction of the rule of law, and it continues to do so. Now, abuse, governmental abuse. Mr. Speaker, since the no confidence motion, which presented a very clear proposition, the government of the day fell. The Constitution is clear. Our leaders are expected to read and understand English. They're expected to also to give effect to the words of the Constitution, not to play games, not to hide behind mathematical fallacies. But since the no confidence motion, there have been 4 cases principally that have engaged the court. There was firstly Reed against Jagdeo. There was Yulita Moore. There was Eslyn David. And there was the Jones case. What was the abuse? All of these litigants had lawyers from across the Caribbean that were paid for by the state of Guyana. How could this be? The rule of law if there is a secret legal fund available to some members of the society and unavailable to the citizens at large, we think that it should be disclosed. I have been in practice for more than 22 years, and I have never heard of the government funding litigation against itself. In fact, you don't need to be a government to figure out that that's ridiculous. Well, the 5 months after March 2nd was characterized by the coalition doing everything within its power to undermine the rule of law. The attempts to rig the elections were transparent. They were even childish. The honorable member who is speaking, the honorable member in the opposition benches who is speaking would know about that. On a daily basis, he would be on television spinning tales. When they were discovered that those tales were false, he would invent more. He would have a good business writing children's stories. Only my humble suggestion, Mr. Speaker. But seriously, Mr. Speaker, no government should be permitted to undermine the will of the people and to use the courts and to use the court system as an instrument of oppression, to delay, to undermine the declaration of an election result. Legions of opposition members took to the airwaves and social media to create false narratives. Mr. Speaker, that undermines the rule of law. The leaders must never, ever do that. Mr. Speaker, we all know that parliamentary oversight is essential. It is essential and it's a pillar of a democratic society. The government must account to the people. The taxpayers must have an explanation as to how their monies are being spent. Guyana has not done that for 640 days. We all knew that the absence of parliamentary oversight was because of the no confidence motion. But the remedy for the no confidence motion was an election within 3 months. We did not have to do that. What we did. We did not have to play games. When the government fell, there should have been an election within 3 months. The mere presentation of a budget by the Honorable Minister in this House is a monumental step to restoring the rule of law and democratic principles in this country, which has been under threat since December 2018. The mere presentation of a budget in this House represents the restoration of parliamentary oversight over government spending. The mere presentation of a budget in this House represents the restoration of constitutional mandates that all government spending must be approved in this House. The mere presentation of a budget in this House represents the democratic principles, and Guyana must be proud that this is being undertaken. Guyana must be proud that it is being undertaken in the record time with which it is. Mr. Speaker, as you well know, the preparation of a budget would usually exceed 120 days. This has been done in 5 weeks, Mr. Speaker. Now, having regard to the undeniable lack of progress, the undeniable lack of supervision, the undermining of the rule of law, perhaps the members on the opposition side would concede this debate. They had nothing at all. At least we have a budget.
Honorable Member, you will need an extension to conclude. Honorable Member, you will need an extension to conclude.
May it please you, Mr. Speaker, could I respectfully ask for 5 minutes for the Honorable Member to conclude his debate speech?
Thank you very much. Honorable Member,
Thank
may
you.
proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honorable Member, Mr. Trotman, mentioned this morning that Guyana has had recognized and positive growth by reports from the World Bank and the IMF. He didn't tell you of the debt that has been left behind. It is incorrect, Mr. Speaker, to equate what an economic indicator of growth is versus what a government financial health is. They are two different things. We are a petroleum producing country. They are different considerations. The private sector would be driven because they are interested in recovering that resource. Honorable Speaker, I just wish to raise a few things that this House, when they did not have supervision and when the rule of law was undermined, what took place. Global Witness, an international organization, has said that the coalition entered into arrangements, into a contract with ExxonMobil that will cost the Guyanese taxpayers approximately $55 billion. The report is available for anyone who wishes to read it online. That's about 1.3 billion United States dollars a year. That's 15 million Guyana dollars for every man, woman, and child. The Honorable Member, Mr. Trotman, rushed to execute that contract. We have heard all sorts of things about the why, but there are certain things that we must understand, and we must know what is in that contract and what the nation and what this government has to deal with. There is something in that contract at clause 32 called the stabilization clause. It says, if there is any change, if the government amends laws, different taxes, if there is any change, Exxon is entitled to a guarantee return, which means if they are to make less money, the government has got to make up the difference. These are not things that any person who is involved in the slightest way in the oil and gas sector would have in a contract any longer. It is no longer used, it is outmoded. In the same court you are. Now, that stabilization clause is what we have to deal with. Now, simple things we have heard for years about local content policy. Having done a bad deal for the government, the coalition would not do the decent thing for 5 years and have a local content policy that would help the citizens. There is still none. One is now being put in place. An advisory board is there. The budget states very clearly at page 59, we're going to implement it. It will be in accordance with the Santiago principles. It will be so that there would be no non-disclosure of any transaction. There will be involvement from civil society. These are the things that must be done if Guyana and the nation is to benefit. Mr. Speaker, finally, I only wish to raise one simple but effective anecdote that has been told to me by my old lecturer. In a petroleum country like Guyana, where we are a blank slate, we have to put legislation, we have to put regulations and all of it in place, and we have to build the capacity to negotiate. It's like making bread. And if we are to make bread, the ingredients have to be good enough. We need to do that. We need to have the proper equipment for the baking of the bread. We also need the people to monitor the bread so that it doesn't burn. The most important part of the bread is the people, the flour. But I dare say, if the Honorable Member, Mr. Trotman, if his mother, his dear mother, God rest her soul, had sent him for bread like that, and he had brought back what he brought back to the Guyanese people, he would have got licks. So we cannot be saddled by things that the coalition ignored. Maybe they didn't know, maybe they didn't care, maybe they deliberately did it. It was incompetence, Mr. Speaker, and we could see at page 59 of the budget speech that we are addressing it. Support for creation, building capacity, social and economic infrastructure. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.